In a small cemetery in Bataan Province, Philippines, raindrops mixed with tears as they fell onto a simple wooden coffin. 24-year-old Beatriz Santos would never see her family again, never fulfill her dreams of becoming a nurse, never escape the nightmare that began with a promise of paradise. 3,000 miles away, in the sprawling Emirates Hills district of Dubai, Sheikh Nadir Al-Rashid adjusted his gold cufflinks as he prepared for another business meeting in his marble-lined office. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across walls adorned with priceless art, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of manicured gardens that cost more to maintain than most people earned in a lifetime. The 72-year-old oil magnate showed no signs of mourning, no acknowledgement that another young woman's life had been extinguished under his control. They had promised Beatriz diamonds, but gave her chains. They had offered her salvation, but delivered damnation. They had painted pictures of luxury and respect, but provided only surveillance and suffering. How does a bright, ambitious 24-year-old's dream of saving her family become a nightmare that ends in death? How does hope transform into horror behind the gleaming facades of unimaginable wealth? Beatriz Santos had always been the brightest star in her family's constellation of struggle. Born in the rural rice fields of Bataan Province, she grew up in a bamboo house where the walls were thin enough to hear her father's labored breathing through the night, and the roof leaked during monsoon season, forcing the family to huddle together with metal pots catching the streams of water that threatened their few possessions. Her father, Miguel Santos, had worked the same rice paddies for 30 years, his hands permanently stained with soil and his back bent from decades of planting and harvesting under the scorching Philippine sun. The family's small plot of land yielded barely enough rice to feed themselves, let alone generate income for the mounting medical bills that had begun consuming their lives like termites eating through bamboo. Miguel's heart condition had worsened steadily over the past 2 years. The medication alone cost 8,000 pesos monthly, more than half their total household income. Each trip to the provincial hospital in Balanga meant borrowing money from neighbors who had little to spare, adding another layer of debt to their already crushing financial burden. Beatriz's mother, Maria, took in laundry from wealthier families in the neighboring barangay, her fingers raw from scrubbing clothes in the river before dawn each morning. Despite working from sunrise to sunset, she earned barely enough to buy rice for their family of 6. The younger children, Paolo at 15, Carmen at 13, and little Rosa at just 8, had dreams of their own. But those dreams seemed as distant as the stars that Beatriz watched through the holes in their roof. At 24, Beatriz possessed an intelligence that her high school teachers had recognized immediately. She had graduated valedictorian despite leaving school twice to help with rice harvests during particularly difficult years. Her dream was singular and unwavering: to become a registered nurse, earn enough money to pay for her father's surgery, and lift her family from the generational cycle of poverty that had trapped them for decades. She had been accepted to nursing school in Manila, but the tuition of 120,000 pesos might as well have been $1 million. Every night, she calculated and recalculated their finances on scraps of paper, searching for a mathematical miracle that never materialized. The Filipino tradition of overseas workers, the modern heroes who sacrificed their own comfort to send remittances home, seemed like the only viable path to the future she envisioned. Beatriz had applied for domestic worker positions in Hong Kong and Singapore, but the waiting list stretched for months, and her father's condition couldn't wait. Elena Vasquez arrived in their barangay like a vision from another world, stepping out of a black Toyota Fortuner that gleamed despite the dusty roads. Her silk blouse was pristine white, her manicured nails painted coral pink, and her leather handbag cost more than Miguel earned in 6 months. Word spread quickly through the small community. A marriage facilitator from Manila was visiting families with daughters of marriageable age. Elena's pitch was delivered with the smooth confidence of someone who had perfected this presentation countless times. She opened her laptop in the Santos family's small living room, the screen's glow illuminating faces that had rarely seen such technology up close. The photographs she displayed seemed to come from a different planet. Sprawling mansions with infinity pools, women in designer gowns holding champagne glasses, luxury cars parked in circular driveways lined with palm trees. Elena represented select clients from the Gulf region, prominent businessmen seeking traditional wives from good Filipino families. The arrangements included generous dowry payments, comfortable living conditions, and most importantly, the financial security to transform entire families' futures. She showed them contracts translated into Tagalog, official-looking documents with government seals and legal terminology that sounded impressive despite being largely incomprehensible. The dowry figures made Maria gasp audibly. 500,000 pesos, enough to pay for Miguel's surgery, send the younger children to university, and rebuild their house with concrete walls and a metal roof that wouldn't leak during storms. Elena warned them that her clients were particular about timing, business commitments required quick decisions, and this opportunity wouldn't remain available indefinitely. That night, as Beatriz sat alone in their small courtyard looking up at stars that seemed impossibly distant, she pulled out an old Nokia phone her cousin had given her and recorded a message she hoped never to use. The international flight touched down at Dubai International Airport at 2:47 a.m. The cabin lights dimmed as passengers stirred from restless sleep. Beatriz pressed her face against the small window, watching a landscape of impossible towers piercing the cloudless sky, their glass facades reflecting the early morning sun like scattered diamonds. The driver waiting for her at arrivals was a broad-shouldered man in a crisp black suit who took her single suitcase without a word, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses despite the indoor lighting. The sedan's tinted windows were so dark that once inside, Beatriz felt as though she had entered a moving tomb, the outside world reduced to shadowy shapes and muffled sounds. They traveled through boulevards lined with palm trees and construction cranes reaching toward heaven, past shopping malls that looked like palaces and hotels that defied architectural logic. When they arrived at Sheikh Nadir's compound in Emirates Hills, Beatriz's breath caught in her throat. Massive walls surrounded the property, topped with security cameras that rotated slowly like mechanical sentries, their red recording lights blinking in synchronized patterns. Guards in crisp uniforms stood at ornate iron gates that opened automatically as their vehicle approached, the heavy metal sliding apart with the smooth precision of expensive machinery. The main house rose before them like something from a fever dream, a sprawling white mansion with columns and domes that seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions. Fountains cascaded down tiered marble platforms, their waters catching the morning light and throwing it back in prismatic sprays. A uniformed staff member appeared as soon as the car stopped, a middle-aged woman with downcast eyes who moved with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to serving wealth beyond imagination. She led Beatriz through marble hallways adorned with crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen fireworks, their light dancing across walls decorated with paintings that belonged in museums. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft whisper of air conditioning and the distant sound of water features. Other women moved through the corridors like ghosts, their designer clothes unable to mask the haunted quality in their eyes. They glanced at Beatriz briefly before looking away, their expressions carefully neutral, as if acknowledgement itself was dangerous. When their eyes met for fleeting moments, Beatriz saw recognition there, the shared understanding of women who had arrived with similar dreams and discovered the same nightmare. Her suite was larger than her entire family home in Bataan, a bedroom with a four-poster bed draped in silk the color of fresh blood, a bathroom with a marble tub the size of a small swimming pool, and a sitting area furnished with plush sofas that probably cost more than her father's annual medical expenses. The massive walk-in closet was filled with designer clothes in her exact size, each garment bearing tags from boutiques she had only seen in magazines. Jewelry boxes lined the dresser, their contents glittering with stones that caught the light like captured stars. Sheikh Nadir arrived just before dinner, entering her suite without knocking, his eyes moving coldly over her body in the red dress that had been selected for this first meeting. He was shorter than she had expected from the video calls, his frame thickened by age and indulgence, but his presence filled the room with an authority that made her instinctively step backward. He circled her slowly, the way a buyer might examine livestock at market, his gaze calculating and utterly devoid of warmth. When he spoke, his voice carried the flat tone of someone accustomed to absolute obedience, outlining her new life with the precision of a military commander detailing battle plans. Her schedule would be delivered each morning, printed on heavy cardstock and slipped under her door before dawn. Every hour was accounted for, When to wake, what to eat, when to exercise, what to wear, even her bathroom time allocated in 15-minute intervals. Her primary duty was to maintain herself as befitted his wife, though what this meant in practical terms remained ominously unclear. When she asked about calling her family, his expression hardened like concrete setting, and he explained that all communication would go through his secretary for her protection, as Dubai could be dangerous for naive young women. The cameras were small black domes in the corners of every room except the bathroom, their presence becoming more obvious once she knew to look for them. When she draped a scarf over the one in her bedroom, testing whether they were actually monitored, a security guard appeared within minutes to remove it. The staff moved through the house like shadows, speaking only when absolutely necessary, their eyes never meeting hers directly. She began to understand that this was not mere protocol but survival, that even the servants lived in fear of the man who controlled every aspect of life within these walls. The first slap came on her 10th day, swift and practiced, when she raised her voice to protest another denied request to call home. As her cheek burned and her ears rang, Sheikh Nadir stood over her with the calm expression of someone correcting a minor mistake, explaining that her family had been paid for her and had no further claim. The discovery came during what should have been a routine inspection of her belongings. Sheikh Nadir had returned unexpectedly from a business meeting, his mood already darkened by some undisclosed disappointment, when he decided to personally examine her suite for contraband. Beatriz watched in growing horror as his fingers found the loose floorboard beneath her dressing table where she had hidden the old Nokia phone, wrapped carefully in a silk scarf alongside a faded photograph of her family taken during last year's Christmas celebration. The phone screen still glowed with the last message she had typed to her sister Carmen, a simple inquiry about their father's latest medical appointment that would never be sent. The rage that followed was unlike anything she had witnessed before. Sheikh Nadir's usual cold control evaporated completely, replaced by a fury so intense that the veins in his temples pulsed visibly beneath his skin. The first blow sent her crashing into the marble edge of her vanity, the impact splitting her lip and sending stars dancing across her vision. When she instinctively raised her hands to protect her face, he seized her wrists and twisted them behind her back with such force that she heard something crack in her left shoulder. The beating that followed was systematic and calculated, each strike delivered with the precision of someone who understood exactly how much damage a human body could absorb without breaking permanently. He used his fists, his feet, and the heavy crystal paperweight from her desk, targeting areas that would be hidden beneath clothing. Her ribs cracked under his assault, each breath becoming a sharp reminder of his displeasure. The compound's doctor arrived within an hour, a nervous Pakistani man who had clearly performed the service before, his hands shaking as he cleaned her wounds and administered painkillers with the efficiency of someone working under severe time constraints. The medical attention came with whispered warnings about the consequences of speaking to anyone about her injuries, threats delivered with the quiet desperation of a man who knew his own survival depended on maintaining silence about what he witnessed within these walls. As Beatriz lay on her silk sheets, every movement sending waves of agony through her battered body, she finally understood with crystalline clarity that she might not survive this marriage. The realization hit her with more force than any physical blow Sheikh Nadir had delivered. This was not temporary cruelty that would improve with time or obedience. This was a death sentence being carried out in installments, each episode of violence bringing her closer to joining the disappeared wives whose belongings gathered dust in forgotten rooms. The final straw came 3 days later, when Sheikh Nadir visited her during her recovery, his mood restored to its usual cold calculation. He sat beside her bed like a concerned husband, his voice gentle as honey as he described his recent communication with Elena Vesquez. The marriage broker had been very helpful in locating Beatriz's family in Bataan Province. He explained with chilling calm. Her father's medical treatments could so easily be interrupted. Her younger siblings could face any number of unfortunate accidents, and their modest home could burn just as easily as their neighbors' houses had during the dry season. Lorna Reyes had worked in the compound for 8 years, cleaning the same marble floors and polishing the same crystal fixtures while watching young women arrive with hope and leave in caskets or disappear entirely during convenient accidents. She had lost her own daughter to a similar arrangement in Qatar 5 years earlier, and something in Beatriz's defiant spirit reminded her of the girl she had failed to save. Their alliance began with small gestures. Extra painkillers left beside the water glass, makeup strategically placed to cover bruises, and eventually whispered conversations during the brief moments when surveillance cameras had blind spots or technical malfunctions. Together, they began systematically documenting Beatriz's injuries with the phone's camera, capturing evidence of the systematic abuse that had been carefully hidden from the outside world. Lorna had access to Sheikh Nadir's office during her cleaning duties, allowing her to photograph financial documents that revealed the scope of his trafficking operations and the network of officials who facilitated his crimes. They discovered patterns in his schedule, noting his weekly business trips to Abu Dhabi that left the compound under reduced security for precisely 18 hours every Thursday. The escape plan crystallized around these absences. Beatriz had maintained contact with her childhood friend Maria Luz, who worked as a domestic helper for a Filipino family in Bur Dubai. Maria's employers were traveling to Singapore for 2 weeks, leaving their apartment empty and providing the perfect safe house for someone desperate to disappear. Lorna memorized the guard rotation schedules, identified the service entrance that experienced a 3-minute gap in surveillance during shift changes, and provided Beatriz with a maid's uniform that would allow her to blend with the departing staff. On the chosen Thursday evening, as Sheikh Nadir's convoy disappeared through the compound gates bound for Abu Dhabi, Beatriz gathered her minimal belongings: the documented evidence, her remaining Philippine identification, and the emergency money she had saved by claiming lost jewelry. The compound's architectural luxury worked in her favor during the escape. The vast gardens and multiple buildings created shadows and blind spots that a smaller property wouldn't have offered. She slipped through the service entrance during the precise moment when outgoing staff crossed paths with incoming night security, becoming invisible among the workers who cleaned up after wealth they would never possess. The taxi ride to Bur Dubai stretched like an eternity, every police car and black sedan potentially carrying Sheikh Nadir's men back to reclaim his property. Maria's apartment building was modest but anonymous, a concrete tower indistinguishable from dozens of others housing Dubai's invisible workforce. For the first time in months, Beatriz locked a door from the inside and knew that no one would enter without her permission. The relief was so overwhelming that she collapsed on Maria's simple sofa and wept until exhaustion overtook her fear. In the apartment's small bedroom, she uploaded the documented evidence to encrypted cloud storage accounts, creating multiple backups that would survive even if she didn't. The photographs told a story that legal systems and human rights organizations would understand: systematic abuse, financial crimes, and a network of corruption that enabled wealthy men to treat women as disposable commodities. For the first time since arriving in Dubai, Beatriz felt something approaching hope. The discovery of Beatriz's absence came at dawn when the breakfast tray remained untouched outside her suite door for the 3rd consecutive hour. Within minutes, the compound transformed into a fortress under siege, with security guards conducting systematic searches of every room, closet, and storage space while Sheikh Nadir's voice echoed through the marble corridors like thunder. The staff lined up in the main hall, their faces masks of practiced innocence as they endured interrogations that lasted hours. Lorna Reyes maintained her composure even as the Sheikh's security chief pressed her for details about unusual behavior or suspicious conversations, her decades of survival in wealthy households having taught her the art of appearing simultaneously helpful and ignorant. Sheikh Nadir's network activated with the efficiency of a military operation. Private investigators who specialized in locating missing persons received encrypted files containing Beatriz's photographs and biometric data within hours. His connections within Dubai's police force ensured that official reports described an emotionally unstable young woman who had stolen valuable jewelry before disappearing, painting her as a criminal rather than a victim. The narrative crafted for public consumption portrayed a disturbed bride who had betrayed her husband's generosity, a story that would discredit any accusations she might eventually make. Meanwhile, Elena Vasquez received urgent instructions to increase surveillance on the Santos family in Bataan Province, her network of local contacts beginning subtle intimidation campaigns designed to prevent any cooperation with international investigators. The pressure extended across continents as Sheikh Nadir's influence reached into corners of the Philippines that most people assumed were beyond foreign manipulation. Miguel Santos received visits from men who claimed to be conducting routine immigration checks, their questions focusing on his daughter's mental stability and criminal history. The family's neighbors began reporting unusual activity around their modest house. Strange cars parked on their quiet road, and phone calls that disconnected immediately when answered. The message was clear without being explicitly stated. Beatrice's safety depended on her family's continued silence about the circumstances surrounding her marriage and departure. In Maria's cramped apartment in Bur Dubai, Beatrice felt the walls closing in around her with each passing day. Every delivery truck that stopped outside the building, every maintenance worker who entered the elevator, every neighbor who glanced in her direction seemed potentially connected to Sheikh Nadir's search. She had contacted an investigative journalist from the Gulf News who specialized in exposing human trafficking networks, but their planned meeting kept being postponed as security concerns mounted. The evidence she had compiled filled multiple encrypted folders: photographs of her injuries, recordings of Sheikh Nadir's threats, financial documents proving his payments to officials, and testimonies from other women who had suffered similar fates. Her communications with human rights lawyers in Manila and London became increasingly frantic as she realized the scope of Sheikh Nadir's influence. Every organization she contacted seemed to have connections that traced back to wealthy Gulf donors or board members with business interests in the region. The lawyer who initially agreed to represent her case suddenly became unavailable after his law firm received a substantial donation from a foundation linked to Sheikh Nadir's business empire. As her options dwindled, Beatrice began reaching out to international media outlets, sending anonymous tips to reporters who covered stories about modern slavery and marriage trafficking. The hotel room she moved to near Dubai Marina was supposed to provide anonymity in the city's transient population of tourists and business travelers. The modest accommodation contrasted sharply with the opulent suite she had occupied in Sheikh Nadir's compound, but the simple furnishings and generic decor offered something more valuable than luxury: the illusion of invisibility. Her behavior during these final days alarmed the hotel staff, who noted her reluctance to leave the room, her startled reactions to routine housekeeping visits, and her habit of checking the hallway repeatedly before opening her door. The anxiety medication prescribed by a walk-in clinic was supposed to help her sleep, but Beatrice found herself taking additional pills as her paranoia intensified. Her final phone call to Maria was filled with cryptic warnings about powerful people who made problems disappear, instructions about accessing her digital evidence if something happened to her, and reassurances that she had taken precautions to ensure her story would survive even if she didn't. The conversation ended abruptly when Beatrice thought she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her room. Maria discovered her body 18 hours later, after repeated calls and text messages went unanswered. The hotel room was eerily pristine, as if Beatrice had prepared for departure rather than death. The empty medication bottle beside her bed suggested suicide, but the quantity required to cause fatal respiratory depression seemed inconsistent with accidental overdose. Her laptop remained open on the small desk, its screen displaying an unsent email to her sister Carmen that read simply, "Tell Papa I tried to save us all." The initial police response followed standard protocols for apparent suicides involving foreign nationals with visa irregularities. The investigating officers noted the deceased's history of domestic violence, her illegal status after fleeing her sponsor, and the financial pressures on her family that might have contributed to psychological distress. However, Maria's insistence that Beatrice had been planning to expose powerful criminals, rather than ending her life, prompted a more thorough examination of the evidence. Hotel security footage revealed gaps during crucial time periods, maintenance staff who couldn't be identified, and visitors whose presence contradicted the victim's supposed isolation. The digital trail Beatrice had carefully constructed began revealing its secrets to investigators who understood the significance of encrypted files and anonymous email accounts. Her hidden recordings exposed not just individual crimes but an entire network of corruption spanning multiple countries and involving officials at the highest levels of government and law enforcement. The encrypted files Beatrice had so carefully preserved began revealing their secrets to digital forensics experts who understood the significance of timestamps, metadata, and authentication protocols. Her recordings exposed not just individual acts of cruelty but a systematic operation that treated women as commodities in a global marketplace. The audio files captured Sheikh Nadir's casual discussions with Elena Vasquez about acquiring younger wives, his instructions to staff about managing previous disappearances, and most damning of all, His detailed explanations to business associates about the financial advantages of importing wives from impoverished families who lacked the resources to investigate suspicious deaths. Financial investigators following the money trails discovered a network of corruption that stretched across multiple continents. Bank records revealed regular payments from Sheikh Nadir's accounts to immigration officials in Manila, Dubai police officers, judges in family courts, and even medical examiners who had signed death certificates for previous wives. The paper trail documented a sophisticated system where wealthy men could purchase not just women but entire institutional frameworks designed to protect their crimes. Each wire transfer told a story of systematic abuse enabled by officials who traded their integrity for payments that exceeded their annual salaries. International media coverage transformed Beatriz's story from a local tragedy into a global exposé of modern slavery disguised as traditional marriage. News organizations across Europe, Asia, and the Americas picked up the story, with investigative teams uncovering similar patterns in other Gulf states where wealthy men collected wives like expensive art pieces. The Philippines government, initially reluctant to challenge powerful Gulf allies, found itself under mounting pressure from human rights organizations and its own overseas worker advocacy groups to demand justice for its citizens. Sheikh Nadir's initial response followed the playbook that had protected him for decades. His legal team crafted statements portraying Beatriz as an unstable woman who had fabricated abuse allegations to extort money from her generous husband. They claimed her recordings were doctored, her injuries self-inflicted, and her death the tragic result of mental illness rather than murder. His public relations firm launched a campaign emphasizing his charitable works, his business contributions to Dubai's economy, and his status as a respected member of the community whose reputation was being destroyed by false accusations. The cover-up that had protected Sheikh Nadir for years began unraveling as international pressure mounted beyond what local corruption could contain. Police reports that had previously classified suspicious deaths as accidents or suicides underwent independent review, revealing patterns of evidence tampering and witness intimidation. Staff members from Sheikh Nadir's compound, initially too terrified to speak, began cooperating with investigators after being relocated to safe houses in countries beyond his influence. The other wives, freed from their gilded prison when authorities raided the compound, provided testimonies that corroborated every detail of Beatriz's recordings. Media manipulation campaigns that had once been effective in controlling local narratives proved inadequate against sustained international scrutiny. The Sheikh's attempts to portray himself as a victim of false accusations crumbled when forensic evidence confirmed that Beatriz had been forcibly administered the fatal overdose of medication. Hotel security footage, previously corrupted during crucial time periods, was recovered by digital specialists who revealed the faces of men entering and leaving Beatriz's room during the hours preceding her death. The Philippine government, facing domestic outrage and international diplomatic pressure, formally requested Sheikh Nadir's extradition to face charges of human trafficking, murder, and conspiracy. Human rights organizations that had been systematically excluded from Gulf states found themselves with unprecedented access to evidence and witnesses, building cases that would reshape international law regarding marriage trafficking and diplomatic immunity. Beatriz's death became the catalyst for legislative changes that extended protection to overseas workers in vulnerable situations. New protocols required regular consular visits to foreign brides, independent verification of marriage arrangements, and swift investigation of any suspicious deaths or disappearances. Her family, devastated by her loss but determined to honor her sacrifice, used the compensation awarded by international courts to fund her siblings' education and establish the Beatriz Santos Foundation for Trafficked Women. The legal proceedings that followed would take years to complete, but Sheikh Nadir's arrest on money laundering charges marked the beginning of justice that had been denied to countless women before Beatriz. Other survivors found courage to come forward, their testimonies creating an avalanche of evidence that no amount of wealth or influence could suppress. In the rice fields of Bataan Province, where Beatriz's story began, her family keeps a photograph on their dining table showing her bright smile before the nightmare started. Miguel Santos, his heart condition stabilized by the medical care her sacrifice had funded, often tells visitors that his daughter didn't die as a victim but as a warrior who fought back against a system designed to silence women like her. Beatriz's legacy lies not in the wealth that was promised to her family, but in the protection her courage created for women who might otherwise have shared her fate. Her story serves as a reminder that even in death, truth has the power to shatter the golden cages that wealth and privilege construct around their darkest secrets.